I feel like there is a lack of good Go apparel out there. It seems to be difficult to find just not even good Go shirts, but Go shirts in general. I can't find any. And then when I see somebody wear one, I'm like, whoa, where'd you get that? So if you feel the same way and you want to wear a Go shirt while also supporting your favorite podcast, well, you're in luck because the Starpoint store has officially launched. It's store.starpointpaduk.com. And if you go there, you'll find two humble designs by yours truly. One of them being the Starpoint logo. So if you want to just rep the podcast, you can pick up one of those shirts. And if you feel like doing something a little more generally Go related, the other design is a snapshot of AlphaGo Game 4, the iconic wedge move played by Lee Sedol that made AlphaGo go all haywire. So these two shirt designs are available on store.starpointpaduk.com. So I'd appreciate if you go and take a little meander through the aisles of the Starpoint store. And if it picks up at all, I might add some more designs. Just keep in mind that this is a print-on-demand store, so basically I don't keep inventory. The designs are sent to a local manufacturer who sends it over to you. I did order these shirts as samples to make sure that they were up to quality. I also had a couple of things that I tried that were not up to quality and that got cut. So these two, I was happy with the results. So if you want to support the show and you want a nice Go shirt to wear, go check out store.starpointpaduk.com. But you're listening to Starpoint, the show about Go for Go fans away from the board. And we got a spicy one today. It's a real juicy one filled with drama, and a lot of you are probably very aware of all the stuff that's been going on in the past week regarding the LG Cup. The LG Cup, the World Major Tournament between Koje and Byun, had a big kerfuffle going around, ruffling a lot of feathers, very sensitive topic for a lot of people. But I'm going to talk about that today. But before giving any takes or talking about who's right and who's wrong and things like that, let's just go over what happened. Whether you have not heard of this incident yet, and this is the first time you're hearing of it, I want to make sure I get you on the same page as everybody else. Or if you've heard this story millions of times, well, let's freshen up, okay? Let's see if we can kind of knock out some of the details and run down what happened and why this is such a big controversy. And this has really been the most newsworthy week in Go in a long time. This is a thing that has bled into the mainstream, at least over there in Asia, I think. So some people in Asia have heard of it that don't play Go. I don't think it's quite big enough for the West to, you're not going to go into the office the next day and say, like, hey, you hear about the LG Cup controversy? Yeah, no one's going to know what you're talking about unless they're Go players. But anyway, so the LG Cup, what is that? The LG Cup is a world major Go tournament. That is to say that it is basically a tournament to find a world champion, unlike, let's say, the domestic tournaments that are held within a specific country for members of that country. So it's not like a Japan-specific tournament or a Korea-specific tournament. This is a tournament that involves international players. People come from different countries to come and compete and find out who can be declared the world champion. So that's the LG Cup. A couple other world majors that you may have heard of, maybe like the Samsung Cup or the Ing Cup. These are all world major tournaments. And the prize money is 300,000 Korean won, which equates to around 200,000 US dollars. And it was between Koje, a Chinese player, and Byun, a Korean player. If you're wondering why you don't hear Shin Jin-seo's name in here, it's because he was knocked out early in the preliminaries. That happens sometimes. He doesn't make it to the final sometimes, even though he's, mostly considered the best player in the world right now. Some background on Keuje and Byun Sang-il. So Keuje was the strongest player for a while, kind of in the pre-AlphaGo era. He has 8 world titles under his belt, and this would have been his 9th. He's quite an animated player, and maybe sometimes controversial. And he's opened a restaurant recently. He's been kind of active on social media. I saw him dressed up as various things and posting things like that. It's I don't have I don't have any context for that stuff, but it's kind of entertaining. Byun Sang-il, Korean one-time world champion. So the degree between these two players, Keuje, 8-time world champion, Byun Sang-il, one-time world champion. He won the Chunlan Cup at some point. So he's not as big of a name. He's not as renowned, but he does show up quite often in the later stages of big tournaments. Keuje and Byun Sang-il, neither of them have a very spotless record in terms of their etiquette and manners, which will come into play later on when I discuss what happens here. But notably, Byun Sang-il cried and slapped himself in the face while playing against Chejong because he lost against Chejong, which was a big upset during a Samsung Cup. And it's like, it was really awkward because he was like on a computer screen across from her, and then she was on, because it was like kind of during the COVID times where they weren't playing with real stones. And it's just kind of like off the corner of her eye. He's just like slapping himself and like crying, and it was just kind of not the most becoming of him. Keuje also has a little bit of a track record when it comes to stuff like that. There was a game where he made a critical mistake against Park Jung-hwan in the finals of a tournament, and he threw. It was like a double-digit Q mistake. He like didn't connect some big group or something. It was a giant mistake. It was like a game upsetting mistake at the end of the game. And he was so surprised and upset that he grabbed a bunch of stones and threw them on the ground. And I actually originally thought in this clip that Keuje was so surprised he just jumped and he happened to knock a few stones in the air. But rewatching this video, I realized you can see his fingers grab the stones from the bowl and then he slams them on the ground. Everyone else, including Park Jung-hwan, the moderators, they're stone-faced and they just don't move at all. And he just slaps himself, gets back in the game, and decides to keep playing. So, it goes an emotional game. Everybody handles their emotions differently. Anyway, just some side notes. They don't really matter too much. Just to characterize these two before we get into it. Okay, so the controversy starts with the second game, because this game in this finals tournament in the LG Cup is a best of 3, which is the first one to win 2 games out of 3 wins the entire cup. And in game 1, Keuje wins without much incident, not much happening. But game 2 is when something kind of funny happens. And to understand what happens, you have to understand this rule that the KBA, the Korean Baduk Association, introduced during the LG Cup. So partly that's kind of crazy to introduce a rule in the middle of a cup, but to take a little heat off of that, the cup does last for a few months. So the rule was implemented last November, but I believe that the rule was only in play for this final tournament. In any case, the prisoner rule, is that you must place your captured stones into the lid after your capture. Into, where you keep all your captured stones, it needs to be in the lid. You can't put them on the table or on the ground or on your chair or behind the board or anything like that. You got to drop it in the lid. Now, maybe half of you are thinking, like, where else would you put those stones? And why wouldn't you put them in the lid? And why would you need a rule for that? Maybe the other half are thinking, why does it matter where you put the stones, whether it's in the lid or not. How does that justify a rule? Well, both points being somewhat valid, there's some history here. And the fact that this final is between a Chinese player and a Korean player is quite significant. Because as you know, well, since we don't have a governing body, when you play a world major tournament and it's hosted by a certain country, that country enforces their own rules in the tournament. So if you go to Japan to play a world major, you'll play with Japanese rules. If you go to China to play a world major tournament, you'll play with Chinese rules. And in this case, this is a Korean-hosted world major tournament. It was using Korean rules. So the KBA gets to decide what the rules are for the tournament. Chinese players traditionally play with Chinese scoring. And in that style of scoring, prisoners don't matter. You don't fill the board with prisoners at the end of the game. You just count the area of territory that one of the players has, and then you count the stones as well, included in that count for that player, and how much of that takes up the board, and then you do a little math thing where you subtract from 360, and then you see who won the game that way, and you don't use any prisoners at all. In Korean and Japanese rules, prisoners are essential to counting, and they are used to fill up the dead spaces, or they used to fill up spaces on the board later on during counting. If you've played with both sets of rules, you'll know kind of that they're very different. Well, and also they kind of end up in the same result anyway. So with that in mind, Chinese players are more likely to violate this rule of putting your stone in the bowl, because Korean and Japanese players, they're going to put the stones in the bowl because they're expecting to count the points with them at the end of the game, whereas Chinese players, they can put them wherever they want and they can still count the game at the end of the day. It won't really matter where you put your prisoners as long as they're taken off the board. So this could be a little problematic for the Chinese players who have been used to playing stones or taking captured stones and just putting them wherever. This has led to some conflicts in the past between the Chinese players and the Korean players. I saw a Go Inside video covering this matter, and I've also seen a couple other sources where they've mentioned these things. As far as the history goes between the Korean players and the Chinese players with this rule, I believe that the rule actually has been a guideline for a while to put the stone in the lid after capture, but it's just never been enforced. And this world major, in the middle of the tournament before the final event, the KBA decides to create a strict enforcement and an actual tangible punishment for this rule, where if you don't place your prisoner in the lid, your first violation you get -2 points. Your second violation, you get an immediate forfeiture of the game. Pretty big punishments. And you can see how this may be a little problematic if you're a Chinese player who's not used to that and you just do that by accident. So we'll get into that later. But back to the Go Inside coverage that I saw of the history of some of the things that happened in the past. A recent KBL game, the Korean Paduk League game, a Chinese player was holding on to a stone in their hand while they were playing, instead of having that prisoner be placed in the lid. And the Korean player thought he was ahead by 0.5 point. But at the end, the Chinese player opens his hand and reveals that there was another stone. Now, I don't think anybody thinks the Chinese player was trying to deceive the Korean player, but I think the Korean player was frustrated that the information that he thought he had was incomplete. And as you know, at the professional level, if you know you're ahead 0.5 point, or if you know you're behind 0.5 point, it's going to really change how you play your game. So it does matter in that situation. And so that player filed a formal complaint to the KBA. So that was a recent happening. And then there was another famous case 15 years ago where So another thing that the Chinese players might do sometimes is they will take a stone captured and they will put it back in their opponent's bowl, right? That's a kind of a logical thing to do. If you're not going to use the stone, just put it back in the bowl. You might as well, so you don't have to clean it up. But when they counted, they used Korean scoring or Japanese scoring, probably Korean scoring. I don't know which league it was. And the Korean player won by half a point. But the Chinese player claimed, wait, I put one of my stones in his bowl. You need to count that. So that was kind of a tense situation then. It's like, well, I mean, maybe it's a bigger deal back then if they weren't counting using a computer and tracking things like that. But it's like kind of could be a frustrating experience for everybody in that situation. And then finally, there was another incident where the Korean player was facing a Chinese player in a Japanese tournament. And at the end of the game, the Chinese player revealed that there were a pile of stones on the table, between the board and their body. And it was just kind of, I don't know, I guess a professional, I would expect to know that, okay, I know that there were more captured stones than that I see on the lid. There must be more behind the board. So I don't know how much of this one was legitimate, but in any case, some conflict in the history of the rule. So game 1, again, Koje wins. Game 2, Koje violates this rule twice. So first time he gets docked 2 points, and then the second time he is docked the entire game and is disqualified from the game. Koje obviously upset and frustrated, but accepts the ruling and tries to prepare himself for game 3. Now, in game 3, this is when things go really bad, because this is what happens in game 3. Koje again makes the mistake of placing the stone on the table instead of the lid. But before anybody says anything, 20 minutes passes, and Koje takes that stone, realizes that it's not in the lid, and puts it back in the lid. So again, this is like way later after the violation has occurred. And then the referee comes up and decides to moderate this and assign the penalty to Koje. Now, there's a lot of stuff wrong with this. Like, why was the referee not on top of it? Why was the penalty put in so late? And then finally, what really made Koje upset is not necessarily the rule violation itself, but the fact that the referee came in during Byun Sang-il's turn on a somewhat intense move, while Koje was trying to pressure Byun Sang-il on time, because Byun Sang-il in this situation was winning. According to AI, was like at a 98% win rate, however, was severely down on time. So the fact that the moderator came in and paused the game on Byun Sang-il's turn made Koje really upset and made him argue with the moderator. Now, in this situation, when there's an extended pause, they do cover the board with this little box. But I mean, come on, like pros, they can pretty much capture the whole board in their heads and keep playing in their heads. So it's not really that valid of a pause. So Koje stands up and starts arguing with the moderator. And there was a transcription that I found that somebody provided. He says, "No, you can't pause it. I'm still thinking about this move. So how could you possibly stop it? You really can't do this. He's supposed to make this move like this. You're making him think about it. At least if I'm on the right track, you can do this. Standing up. No, how could this happen? It's his turn to move now, not mine. How can you let this happen during his move? Are you giving him extra time to think? It's always like this. I'm asking how he's using his time. How could this happen? Isn't this giving him just a bit more time? How could this result have any credibility?" So Koja very shaken, and it seems to be that he's not protesting the rule violation itself, but the untimely application of it. And they discussed this for 2 hours. I don't know who's involved in the discussion, but at the end of the day, the moderator tells Koja he has 2 options: to accept the -2 points and keep playing, or to forfeit the game. And Koja refuses to accept anything and just leaves, and he refuses to keep playing. And so by default, Byun Sang-il wins 2 games without actually winning them. So a lot of people are making a joke that Byun Sang-il is the first one to win a World Major Tournament with a 0-1 record. And this is an upsetting situation for everybody involved, and for all the Go community members who are not necessarily involved. This is a very tense thing, and it's caused a lot of people to have very strong feelings about it. And then it's just not a good situation. On the one hand, you have Koja's side of the story, where the KBA is discriminating against Chinese players, that this ruling is not in the spirit of Go, that basically they're using the rules outside of the game to win the game, which is not cool, right? As Go players, we don't want that to happen. We don't want to resort to that. We want things to be settled on the board. That's the game we love, and this is the game that we want to decide who the victor is, not any kind of political thing outside of the board. Byun Sang-il's side, some things to say about Byun Sang-il's side. After the whole incident, Byun Sang-il did come out and say, I don't think this rule should be in place. And so he did kind of concede that. It's not a great position for him to be in either, because let's say he wanted to win this tournament, but he was able to, but not really with the full merit that comes with it. Some people are making fun of him for the way he acted in Game 2, because the way that the rule violation was caught was that Koja had left his seat for a bit, and then Byun Sang-il raises his hand, calling over the moderator, pointing at the stone on the table. And so it's a bit of a tattletale moment for him. But I mean, people interact with rules in different ways, and the rule, I mean, maybe a more purist, honorable player would not have called the referee. But what I was thinking was that, like, I would, if it was me and I was playing a tournament game, I would not do that. I've actually let things slide quite a few times. For example, like in an AGA tournament, people don't use passing stones. It's like, sometimes it's better to educate and say, like, hey, we have to pass. Sometimes you're playing somebody who may not necessarily understand what you're trying to say, and it's better to just kind of smooth things along and go with the result that comes out of the way you're doing it. And just kind of using that, reading the room a little bit to see what the best course of action is in the spirit of the game. Maybe Byun Sang-il lacks a little bit of that, and could have shown a little more respect to what the purpose of the because I don't think he was offended by Koja's behavior, which is kind of one reason why that the KBA, I think they have introduced this rule, is to kind of create this uniformity among the players. And I think the brunt of the fault of this incident definitely falls on the KBA and the moderator himself, because you really need to step in and enforce the rule cleanly without delay. Otherwise, everything gets way muddier. It's already a muddy situation as it is, where this stupid little thing where you don't put the stone in the bowl, in the lid, causes a disqualification. It's a very serious thing. And so to be slacking on that and not call that rule when it's violated, and just wait 20 minutes and then after the mistake was fixed, call it again. Like that is just absolutely sloppy, and it's not really good moderation. There's a comment I saw on GoPro Yonu's Korean channel that I kind of encapsulates my thoughts on this. Next time, get a referee who's quick and decisive. What were they doing instead of stepping in immediately when the issue occurred? If they had acted promptly, things would have been resolved cleanly. Instead, where were they messing around, only to crawl in much later and escalate the situation further? I completely agree with this, especially since Koja doesn't seem to have a problem with the actual ruling. Maybe he would have vented outside of the game afterwards about how stupid it was that he was punished for that. But I think the fact that the reason he was so upset during the ruling itself was the behavior of the referee and pausing on Byun Sang-il's time. Not that, like, you do have to pause on one player or another's side, but the fact that it wasn't prompt, I think, is a big argument for that not being handled properly. The other thing is the KBA introducing this rule in the middle of the tournament between games is very suspect to me. I don't know enough context to know why and what motivated the KBA to do this at this particular time. But that's probably not a good thing to do unless it's an emergency situation, which I don't think it was. I don't think that Koja was like throwing stones left and right. I think the mistakes that he made was more of a just habit thing where he's just used to not putting it in the bowl. So I don't think the timing of the rule was great. The rule violation enforcement timing was bad. And finally, the thing that I think most people are talking about is the rule punishment itself is too harsh for such a small, trivial matter. And I agree with this. To the point that I don't think that messing with points should ever be done. I don't think that in the game of Go, you should implement rules regarding the outside of the game that affect the inside of the game with the points. This is why I hate in-cup rules, because they have these like time where you can buy time with points. I hate that. I think the Go game should be left alone and the points should be the points on the board. Any other punishment should be, I would prefer time, right? Time punishment I can understand maybe, but otherwise outside of time, maybe a misconduct punishment where there's a fine or suspension or something like that, right? I would rather have something like that, keeping the game preserved. But to give one point to the KBA here, a little point of sympathy here. It's very difficult to get players to follow certain rules, especially if the rules seem kind of trivial, but they're important. For example, like, there's no rule that says you can't like tap a stone on the table and make a noise. Like, that's just going to happen in the game. But if you're intentionally doing that, or if you do it too habitually, whether intentional or not, it can be very distracting for the other player. And we need to have rules in place to control the environment enough that these little distractions don't derail the game. And it's important to keep these things. So it's difficult though, because imagine somebody's doing that. Like, you can't immediately disqualify them, even though it may be a violation of a rule, right? How many times can somebody cause this kind of disruptive behavior before he faces consequences? And how do we scale up those consequences accordingly? It's a difficult thing to assess, and I think it ultimately comes down to trusting the moderators and having good moderators and referees. It's kind of like our legal system where it's like, yes, you have the legislators making the law, but at the end of the day, you have some human judgment come into play when you bring in the jury and the judge. And you can't get away from that. And the moderator just needs to be a good moderator and needs to hold responsibility for making the best decisions for the players, for the game, and for the tournament. And so that's why it's important that the tournament director role is so important and needs somebody who has a good head onto their shoulders and can make judgments in fairness and in the spirit of the game. And so this situation is like an example of a moderator who did not really fully live up to that standard. That's my thoughts on the KBA here. In regards to Kudje's upset, I mean, anybody would be upset losing that way. But again, he was not contesting the rule itself. He was contesting the timing of the rule, and then he was kind of expressing some grievance about the rule itself. My take here, I understand emotions are at play, and it's frustrating, and you got a lot of money on the line. But for me, rules are rules, and you should follow them in a game, and you protest them outside the game. When a moderator makes a ruling, you just accept the ruling 90% of the time, I would say. And then afterwards, you file a complaint. Afterwards, you say that was not a good rule and speak out about it. Because when you agree to play a game with another player, you agree upon a set of rules before you play the game. Otherwise, you can't. Like, have you ever played a board game or any game in general where you haven't established clear rules, and halfway through the game you have to start making up rules, but now it's difficult because people are invested and they've made certain decisions, and it doesn't make sense to make rules in the game because people are going to be biased, right? This is why you have to set clear rules outside of the game and then follow the rules when you're playing in the game. So the best thing for me to recommend here is following the rules within the game, but contesting the rules before or after the game. So if this was a harsh punishment rule, I mean, something should have been said before the game. And it's like people kind of brush things aside, like, oh, okay, that's a strange rule, but whatever, it's probably not going to happen. And then they go in. But I think it's important to be really, to scrutinize rules and dig into them and look at them and say, hey, whoa, that rule is crazy. I don't know if I want to agree to playing with that rule in play. Because once you play the game, you've kind of signed a contract, and you can't really argue during the game when you're behind or when the rule will not benefit you in a certain way. You can't argue the rule at that point. So I think overall, as a principle, I would say that rules are rules. You agree on them before the game, you follow them during the game, and then you contest them after the game. And then Go professionals, I think, of all people, should know that the smallest mistakes can cost you the game. And so being a professional of his caliber, I mean, Kudje knows how to play Go, basically the most difficult game in the world at a world champion level. If you compare that to a DDK player who knows how to put a stone in the lid, it's a little bit hard to show Kudje some sympathy for making this mistake. I understand people are used to a certain way, and it's a muscle memory thing maybe, but having played in international tournaments with Japanese and Korean players all his life, I don't know why he wouldn't automatically just do that as a habit, because that is the respectful thing to do in those other cultures. Because it was not one, not two, but three separate violations. And when I play a game of Go, I'm thinking of all the smallest little things, and I consider the metagame to be part of the game. When I'm looking at the time, I'm making sure I press the button on the clock before I make after I've made my move, and I remember that. Otherwise, I'll be punished for it. There's no rule saying that I'll be given back my time if I forget. This actually happened to me. I think I've told this story before, but I was at a tournament and I was playing against an older Chinese man, and throughout the game, I would always catch his time bleeding. And I reminded him whenever I saw that, not because I had any obligation to, I certainly did not have any obligation to, but thought it was just the polite thing to do, to say, hey, you forgot to press your clock. And so he would press his clock, and then it would be my time. But he did it a few times, and then one time I didn't even notice that his clock was running because I was thinking about my own move. And I was thinking quite a bit. And looking at my move, I finally made my decision, and I made my decision and move. And I look over at the clock, and I realize it's not my time that's running, it's his time that's running. So at this point, I'm just kind of like, well, you gotta hit your clock so that I can hit my clock. So he hits his clock, I hit my clock, it goes back to his time. So because of this, he was kind of running out of time. And by the end game, there was a huge co-fight, a lot of moves were made. By the end of the match, I was looking for kind of the last bit of end game moves, and I was trying to figure out if I'd missed anything. And it was about time to wrap up the game when his clock runs out. And without thinking, I just point at the clock. I'm like, oh, your time ran out. And his remark was, oh, the game is finished. And the subtext being, why are you worrying about the clock when the game is done? There's nothing else to play. Well, maybe he thought there was nothing else to play. Maybe I wanted to think more. Maybe I wanted to look at the board more and see if there's anything else I wanted to play. But, I thought I was ahead. I didn't want to have any conflict, and I wanted things to go smoothly. And I decided to do the gracious thing and just say, "Hey, okay, fine. Let's go to count." I think even if I thought I was behind, which I was behind, I still would have said, "Let's go to count." Fine. And I lost the game because of that. Now, this was just a local tournament game amongst Q players. If I was playing for $200,000, would I have done the same thing? No. I would have raised my hand, said, "Hey, referee, this guy lost on time, and I think I win because of that," and I would have claimed my 200K. Is it because I don't care about Go at that level? No. It's because at that level, you're in a professional zone, and professionals are held to a different standard than club players, tournament players. It's their job to think about these things. It's their responsibility to think about these things, to keep track of your time. There's no one who has sympathy for you if you lose on time and you're like, well, you really won the game, you just lost on time. Nobody thinks like that. It's you lost because you lost on time. There are things outside the game that we have to respect and keep and be responsible for if we want to play a pure game of Go. These are in service of a pure game of Go. And in a tournament game, in a club game, I'm not gonna fight with that, right? I'd rather just focus on improving. I'd rather just take the loss as it is, and take the result, especially if my opponent says, hey, the game is finished, let's go to count. I'm like, okay, fine. If that's how you feel, then that's how we're gonna handle this. But if there's money on the line like that, I can't say that I'm someone who would let them get away with it. So I might be the one, if in Byun Sang-il's shoes, to raise my hand, say, hey, there's a violation here. Give me those 2 points. Pay up, right? Different people have different reactions to these things. Maybe I don't know myself. Maybe I don't know what I would do in that situation. Shin Jin-seo actually probably would have handled it differently. A while ago, he was playing against Koje in the COVID era in a major tournament, and he misclicked. Since it was COVID era, it was on screens, and he misclicked. He clicked his stone on the first line, and everyone knows, even at a DDK level, that that's probably a misclick. Koje scratches his head, but this was also a Korean-held tournament, and I think it was the Samsung Cup. And in this tournament, the rule is that you can't take back misclicks. You're responsible for your mouse movement and clicking, so you can't take it back, right? And so a lot of people are making arguments about the spirit of the game. Like, is it in the spirit of the game to continue playing off of that line one move? And Shin Jin-seo loses, by the way, at the end of that game. But Shin Jin-seo doesn't complain. He doesn't say, hey, I should be able to take back this move. He understands that this is the ruling. And there's a reason for that. I think there's a lot of things that can go wrong in the outside of the game, outside of the board, that affect the game. And it's usually very unfortunate when that happens. Whether somebody loses on time, whether somebody's clumsy and they knock a whole bunch of stones off the board and they're disqualified for something like that. These things, they can affect the game. And the thing is that they're in place to create a controlled and uniform environment for professional play. Because a lot of people might think, oh, okay, why are we upsetting this game due to somebody placing a stone off of the lid? It may seem trivial. It may seem like it doesn't matter and it kind of detracts from the game. But it is also important to keep rules outside of the game so that we can create a disturbance-free environment in the inside of the game. You have all these conflicts that occur in special situations where people may not be putting the stone in the lid, and it can cause psychological pressure. It can cause all sorts of things, and they may all be very trivial sounding. But there's a reason why professional sports players always have to follow so many strict codes. It's because the organizers are always trying to create a controlled environment of fairness for the players. And obviously there are incidents where that's taken too far, and this could be cited as one of those incidents where a lot of things were mishandled. But that's not to say that these rules shouldn't be in place in the first place. I think the rule itself was too harsh in the punishment. Probably shouldn't punish that hard for such a small mistake. But I don't think that the rule itself is unreasonable. If you look at the other sports, they have things like uniforms. You have players switching sides all the time, even though the sides in whatever, soccer, football, or tennis, like sometimes they're just they're the same thing. There's not much difference. But to lower the variation and even the playing field as much as possible, that's what they do. That's what we do to go the lengths that we go to. And then the other thing that I want to go back to is the challenge of the organizers in enforcing the smallest rules, right? Obviously a cheating rule, disqualify them. You're hiding stones, or you're kind of like taking prisoners and whatever, I don't know, something like blatant using AI, you're disqualified. No conflict. But these small etiquette rules, these small things, what can organizers do? What can you do when Rafael Nadal is taking like 1 or 2 seconds per serve more to serve? Like, will you argue that that's going to cause him to win the game? It's kind of tough to say that, but at the same time, is it fair for him to be taking 1 or 2 extra seconds every time he serves? No, it's not. And at some point, those rules need to be enforced somehow. This is a very, very complex issue. I don't have all my thoughts settled on it. I'm still thinking about it. I think the community is still working through it and thinking about it. One thing that I do want to say and call out is that there is a rise of hate against Koreans and Chinese that I absolutely abhor. I think that in the East, there's a little more of a culture where they can jab each other a little bit. But over here in the West, that's not something we do. We don't generalize judgment on people's backgrounds and countries like that based on small incidents. That's not acceptable here. And I would say that that's not acceptable for me around any discussion that I would be around. So that's been very disappointing to see a lot in this controversy, to see people, slinging mud at each other. But I understand a lot of people are passionate about this and feel upset about this. But there are ways to express your feelings and opinions in a civil manner. And finally, what all this leads to, the silver lining in this, I think, is that this is a call for fairer rules, for the organizers to look at this situation as a case study and really polish their rules and enforcements, and train their referees and moderators to be fair and follow a better code. But more, I think, and I hope that this is a stepping stone on a path, because I think it's a call for international Go. As you know, Go doesn't have an international rule set. It's Chinese rules or Japanese rules by and large, and AGA rules and EGF rules. I think this kind of situation calls for an international Go association like FIDE has for chess. I know it's not an easy task to get these countries to work together to assemble a unified vision, but I think it's something that the community really needs. A unified rule sets that is developed into an international rule set and held at all the world major tournaments. If you're holding domestic tournaments, whatever, use your local rules, your Korean, AGA, or Chinese rules. But world major championships should be held under a single umbrella, right? It doesn't make sense really for the Korean Go Association to have control of one major and the Chinese Weiqi Association to have control over another major. They're obviously going to be biased towards their own players. And things like this, it's a lot easier to happen. So I think this is a big call for the international Go community to come together and unify a set of rules and guidelines for all players playing internationally, and also unify the rating system. There's no real rating system in professional Go. It's kind of crazy that we're using GoRatings.com as a proxy to look at how good players are based on their game records. Why are we doing that? Where's the organized rating scale? It's a little ridiculous. There's a lot of stuff that's been coming out of this. So, out of turmoil, out of conflict, laws are written, right? So hopefully this can transition into something better, even though it looks like it's escalating into something worse, as the Chinese Weiqi Association has basically closed off its Weiqi League to international players as a response to this incident. So both sides not happy. A lot of people's feathers are ruffled. It's not a great situation to be in, but it is very spicy, and it's a lot to talk about. As you may know, I am Korean, Canadian, American, and because of that, I do somewhat identify with the Koreans in this situation, although I don't agree with everything that they've been doing. But it has been, I'm not going to lie, very emotional and upsetting sometimes reading some of the comments being thrown around. And it's I have to take it with a grain of salt and understand people are coming from a place of hurt and things like that. But I just really hate the disrespect. I think that people should take a moment to kind of clean themselves of all the vitriol before they voice their opinion so that we can have a discourse on the matter. And if you disagree with anything that I've said today, that's great. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say, but in a civil manner. Among all this, though, there were some funny comments. I saw one that really made me laugh, where they said they've captured Keje and placed him in the lid. That was a funny thing to read among all the different hateful comments that I've seen. And now it's time for the DDK Advice Corner, and the tip of the day is make an enclosure. It's always a huge move to do that. So I think I saw a game where there was an enclosure to be made, and I think it's like the Q player was looking for an excuse not to play it. By the way, an enclosure is if you're going off a 4-4 move, it's a knight's move from it, enclosing one of the corners. Or if you're playing the 3-4, it's also a knight's move from it, enclosing the corner. And it's a big move. Don't neglect that move. If you're looking for something to play, consider that as a top priority. So make an enclosure. And now it's time for listener mail. Mr. Tusif, aka Martin, says, "Hi Justin, thanks for consistently making an episode every week. I imagine this takes a lot of discipline and is hard sometimes. So thanks." Well, thank you for always writing in, Martin. It's always great to hear from you. And yeah, it's it's not so bad. I just kind of sit here for an hour and talk about Go. Sometimes I do kind of get down about my performance in an episode, and I'm like, I don't think that was such a good one. I don't think that was a banger. And then I listen to it and I'm like, all right, maybe it's not so bad. And then I release it, and then some of you invariably say, oh, I'm so glad this podcast exists. And I'm like, oh, I'm so glad that I did that. So it's really people like you that keep me going. So thanks for the appreciation there. Continuing, about your episode on what Go teaches about life. One thing it taught me is let go. On the board, that means sacrifice a stone or group and you will get more somewhere else. Sometimes these stones will come back to you anyway. In real life, you need to choose your fights. Not all are worth fighting. The day has only 24 hours, so manage your resources. But it also might mean let go of the mistake you just made, the situation as it is. Try to make the best out of it. If you accept your mistake, you might even turn around your game. If you try to deny your mistake, your game will worsen. I think this can be directly translated into real life, especially in my professional life. Mistakes just happen. I think it's important to admit them and try to learn from them, then move on. Anyway, keep up your great work. Greetings from freezing cold Austria, Martin. Thanks again, as always, for writing in, Martin. I really resonate with that. I think that I am always... It's always difficult for me to admit my mistakes in Go when I have committed and overcommitted. And it's like when you're in an argument with somebody and you've built up your argument so much that when you realize that you're wrong, you can't admit that you're wrong and you have to keep going. This happens to me in real life, and this happens to me in Go as well, where I've been playing a certain sequence out thinking that this is the way I need to play, and then at a certain point I realize this is a terrible sequence, but somehow I can't stop playing it because when I leave, it's just a mess, and I can't bring myself to do that. So it is a big, challenging thing that it can really teach you about life. So I really like that and resonates with me. Thanks, Martin, for writing in. Seishi writes, you're telling me there's a podcast about Go and I only learn about it now? Definitely going to try some episodes. Thanks. Well, welcome aboard. This is Starpoint. So I'm glad that you have found Starpoint on Reddit. So enjoy. There's a library of there's a catalog of episodes to listen to now. My boy writes, I really enjoy this podcast, man. You've got a special thing going here. Oh, I really appreciate that. Thank you. Sadaharu writes, I think you already mentioned what I wanted to say about what Go teaches you about life. If I were to add, maybe it's about how we shouldn't fret on the moves that we've already made. We cannot change the move that have been played, no matter how much we regret it. Every game is different, so we should just treat the situation that we are given as the problem that we need to resolve and move forward. Complaining about why we ended up in the situation would not help at all and may make things even worse. Focus on how we can make the current situation better and go ahead with it until the end. Like you said, even if we play wrongly, we can just learn from it afterwards. Yeah, it's kind of like the same thing that Martin said, where it challenges you. This game challenges you to accept like uncomfortably bad situations. And then when you are able to do that, you are often rewarded with a turnaround later on that you never thought was possible. I like to call, I have a little phrase that I use, I like to call them zombie stones, where you give up on these stones because you messed them up and you don't know what to do with them, but you had the wisdom to pull out and try to move forward instead of investing in them. And then later on, somehow they magically come to use, and it's amazing. Like, I love that. It's not something that happens often in my games, but definitely a good feeling when it does. And then continuing, Sadaharu also writes, oh, and if you like to watch fast games, Korean Baduk League started using 10-second Fisher this year, so I think you may like to watch that. The only problem is whether you are awake when they're playing. They play every Thursday to Sunday, Korea evening time. Yeah, that's another thing. Usually I see them go live as I'm trying to fall asleep, and then I start watching, and then I'm like, oh, that's bedtime now, so I turn it off. But good to know. 10-second Fisher, that's really good. My favorite is to watch replays of the NHK Cup. I think that one was like a fast time control. And I like to watch that. But yeah, I'll keep an eye out for that Thursday to Sunday. I assume on Baduk TV, the YouTube channel. Thanks for that, Sadaharu. And then today we have the question of the week, which is, what are your thoughts on the controversy? What do you think the best way to handle this was from all sides? whether it's the Korean Paduk Association, the Chinese Weiqi Association, the moderator, Byun Sang-il, Koje. A lot of different perspectives here to consider. Please keep comments civil and respectful of not only each other, but the dignity of all humans involved in this situation. Any kind of disrespect and vitriol will not be tolerated. Should go without saying. As Go players, we're supposed to be peaceful and respectful of each other. So hopefully we can support that stereotype. If you want to share your thoughts on this question, or you have a Go story to share, or have a question of your own, you can comment on YouTube or the Reddit post for this episode, or you can email me directly at starpointpaduk@gmail.com. That's starpointbaduk@gmail.com. And if you're a YouTube listener, I would greatly appreciate a like and a subscribe. If you're a podcast listener, reviews and ratings also help. A very, very special thank you to James B. I saw that you changed your name. Tristan and Garrett D. Thank you. And Garrett has a little message to say. Thanks for this podcast. I truly enjoy listening to it each week and hope you're able to continue it for the foreseeable future. I only started playing about half a year ago, but appreciate being able to listen to similarly passionate people. Keep on keeping on. Thanks so much, Garrett, for your contribution and for supporting Starpoint. If you want to support the show in any capacity, you can go to kofi.com/starpointpaduk or the newly opened store.starpointpaduk.com. You know how to get a Go player to give up his seat on a bus? You give him a little kick and he'll stand up. Thanks for listening. Keep playing Go.